Hello, I'm Kamara Butler,
I'm Derrick.
I'm David Wilson.
and this is our Group 4 project. Our job is to analyze how variations of motivation affects human performance during a race.
We will be using the Life Source Home Blood Pressure Kit model UA100 to measure blood pressure. This is how we're going to collect data because blood pressure is tied to motivation. Dopamine is a chemical hormone produced when one's body being motivated. Dopamine increases blood pressure in the body, which is how blood pressure is connected to motivation. Our null hypothesis is that the independent group will have a higher blood pressure from being motivated before or after the race. Our alternate hypothesis will be that there will be little to no increase in blood pressure from being motivated before or after the
So for our experiment, we're going to have our independent group and our control group. For the independent group, that's where we're going to be testing these variations of motivation. And for our control group, there will be no level of motivation whatsoever. We're going to do a repeated measures design where our participants go through both the control and the independent variable group.
Hello, I'm Kamara Butler, and I will be talking about the process that my group and I undertook for the Group 4 project. So we decided ahead of time to use 4 different people as our test subjects for our project. So we decided that we would want to test their blood pressure, calculate their blood pressure before running and after running, both with no motivation at all. And then we went into the different types of motivation, which were positive motivation, which was verbal, tough love motivation, a competition motivation, monetary motivation, and social motivation, in which it was more like a collaborative effort when one of the test subjects had to run the distance with one of us, either me, Derrick, or David. And then we actually got started with the process. So we started to test on Elizabeth, and then to make sure that she had a break, because testing their blood pressure too many times without a couple minutes break, at least 5 minutes break in between, can really mess up our data, and it's not good for the health of the subject. So we gave them a break. We gave Elizabeth a break, and while we gave Elizabeth a break, we asked another person to help us out, and so we chose Delaney. And then while Delaney was running, Elizabeth taking a break, and when Delaney was done, we called Elizabeth back. When Elizabeth was done, we called another person while her and Delaney rest, and that person was Victoria. And Victoria did the races with the different kinds of motivation, and we also calculated her blood pressure like the rest of the girls before running, and the blood pressure after running with no motivation at all. Those would act as our controls. And then we decided to use one more person, and that person was Betsy. So Betsy came in while the other 3 girls were resting, and we just cycled all 4 of them out while one is running and doing the experiment with. So while one person was working with us during the experiment, the other 3 were resting, so that our data would be accurate when we calculated their blood pressure. A couple weeks before we had to do the experiment for Group 4, my group and I were thinking, what should we do that would be unique from the rest of the group? So we decided that maybe we should see if different kinds of motivation would affect human performance during a race. So we did research to see how could we measure a change in human performance during a race, and how would motivation play into that factor. So we did research, and the research led us to find out that dopamine is actually a way to calculate, a change in the human performance during the race. So dopamine is connected to blood pressure, in which we needed to use a blood pressure monitor. So that's what we decided to do, and then we started to think about how would we like to do it. Would we like to do the race in which it would be a race between us, the conductors of the experiment, or our test subjects, or should we do them like a competition within themselves, between themselves? We just were thinking of what to do. Then we decided it would be best to just have them run on the track. When we found out where we would be for Group 4, we decided they need to run on the track, and a kind of motivation would be them running by themselves, but also implement social motivation or collaborative motivation, and also competitive motivation. That is what we ended up doing, and it turned out to be great. And then we needed to talk to Mr. Delgado to get a blood pressure monitor, and Derrick did that because Mr. Delgado is his teacher, and Mr. Delgado said, allowed us to use the blood pressure monitor. But when we were the day of group 4, we were trying to figure out how to use this blood pressure monitor, and that is one thing I think we can say that we should have done in advance instead of only getting the blood pressure monitor the day of. We should have tried to see if we were allowed to at least test it out a couple days before, so we could get the hang of it to make the experimental process go by faster. But that's something we didn't do, so now we know in the future, and that's going to be perfect for the IA. We need to know, especially when we have equipment that we haven't used before or equipment that we're borrowing. It might not operate the same way that we would think it would operate, because it's not ours, so we don't know what make or model it is. So that's something we need to do in advance, and that's something we're going to make sure we implement into our IAs, is that we do things in advance when it comes to equipment, and not just wing it or figure it out when it's experiment time. Another thing I would say that we should have done better was we should have thought ahead about the monetary part, because the day that we decided to do monetary, we all had money on us. However, like, some of that money was going to be used for our lunch after group 4, so we had to give away some of our money just for our experiment, for the people to produce a change within the data. It did work, however, we lost money to eat for lunch, so that's another thing we will definitely not do next time, especially in IA. Some things that we did really well, we had great communication. I think we didn't get frustrated necessarily with each other, but the fact that we all were doing this for the very first time. We're all working as a group for the first time, and also we're using equipment for the very first time. Another factor in which we should have done, and which we did do well, would be our organization. So I was the recorder. Derrick and David were the ones working the blood pressure monitor, and we also had, if Derrick was working a blood pressure monitor, then David would be the one who was motivating the person, or vice versa. And I was mainly the recorder, but I also motivated people as well, and I was actually recording the people like run, and I was taking pictures, all that sorts, while I was also recording data. So there was great balance between our roles.
Hello, my name is Derrick Sivorovong, and our Group 4 project is determining what level of motivation causes the biggest increase in blood pressure. So I'm in charge of showing how our experiment is related to chemistry and biology. So for chemistry, as one's body is reacting to emotions, the brain has neurotransmitters that would send chemical messages to the body systems for it to adapt to whatever emotion that one's body is feeling. And one of these neurotransmitters is dopamine. And dopamine is activated from when one's body is being motivated, and it would send messages to the body to react to the motivation of that person. For biology, dopamine sends a chemical message to the body for other body systems to adapt to the motivation. So one of the major body systems is the cardiovascular systems. And that is basically the blood system. So dopamine, as it sends chemical messages to the cardiovascular system, there is a increase in blood pressure depending on the level of motivation. According to our experiment, it seemed that positive motivation was caused the highest increase in blood pressure.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Louise, and motivation that helped me best was the competition one, because you're versus somebody and you are doing your absolute best to try to beat the other person. So you try to go as fast as you can and run and try to beat that other person. Of course, I didn't win versus David, but it did help me to, keep on trying and keep on going because my goal was to beat him.
The tough love motivation was the one that mostly helped me because it just made me keep going and it made me kind of want to prove everybody wrong with what they were saying.
Come on, Betsy, come on, go faster. Run.
Come on.
Run like the wind. Come on. Run faster than your grandma. Yeah, come on.
Come on, run like the wind.
Yeah.
Based on what we learned from our data, we were able to come to the conclusion of two specific things. The first thing was that we did definitely see an increase in blood pressure. And what I mean by we saw an increase in blood pressure is before each participant began to run or be tested based on any form of motivation, we did measure their initial blood pressure or their initial BP. And we also measured their BP after they had run and been tested based on different variations of motivation. And we discovered that there was certainly an increase. No measurement of blood pressure was lower or as low as the initial measurement. Now, keep in mind that in between trials, we did have our participants rest a significant amount of time so that their blood pressure should kind of even out, level out. I don't know if it go back down to exactly the same place it was when we initially measured it. However, I do believe it would get close enough to where it wouldn't drastically affect our results. The second thing we noticed was that there was variation in the results in the variations of motivation. So we did have 5 different forms of motivation. The first being positive motivation, encouragement, positive, friendly speak. The second form was tough love, kind of like you would think of how a general would talk to his soldiers in the army to get them to do better. The third was we wanted to do rewards, encourage them, let them know, you get this done, you're gonna benefit from it. And we weren't bluffing, we were serious, we gave them rewards. The fourth form of motivation was social. That was where they had to run with a partner and they both relied on each other. One partner could not complete the task without the other. So they were under pressure for their partner. The final one was competition. That one was a little bit cruel. The same partner that they had in the social motivation, they had to use as a competitor in the competition variation of motivation. So yeah, we turned partners into enemies, just like that. But my point is, although we did see a rise in blood pressure from the initial measurement, there were ups and downs between the variations of motivation. For example, one of the participants could have got a very high blood pressure for the tough love form of motivation, but could have got a low blood pressure for the social form of it. And we wondered, we didn't think that there would be differences in the variations. We just thought the amount of motivation was what we were gonna get the biggest significance in. However, a lot of what we noticed was that it wasn't the amount of motivation at all. It was the different types of motivation. And I absolutely love that because our experiment discovered something we weren't even looking for. And that's awesome. The only limitation I would say that our experiments had was, first, we did have a little bit trouble with the measuring of the blood pressure only because we didn't know how to work the device But once we figured it out, we did make sure that everything was accurate. If there were any blood pressure measurements that didn't seem accurate, we did not include them in our data. Another limitation I would probably suggest is we don't necessarily know that the rising of the blood pressure was caused by motivation. We are saying that based on our research, but the rising of the blood pressure could simply be from the conditions that our participants were in. A lot of them have different body shapes and sizes. That could be it. Or it could simply just be the fact that they might not have exercised in a while, and this exercising has kind of brought their blood pressure up. But overall, I do think that we've come on to something here. I do think that our experiment did prove something, and I definitely think that we got what we were looking for out of it.